Jonathan Smith and Michigan State earned a program-changing win over the Iowa Hawkeyes on Saturday, beating Kirk Ferentz and Iowa football 32-20 in what was a strange, random, and yet again program-changing win. This was the most success, and this is why I say the win was random. This is the most success I have seen any offense have against an Iowa defense since, 2021 Michigan in the Big Ten championship game, or Purdue against Iowa that same season. You may have to go much further back. I mean, this is what Michigan State did to Iowa's defense was a work of art. It was beautiful. Ohio State and Michigan, they both played Iowa in 2022. Michigan, efficiency monstered Iowa to death, game controlled them to death. Ohio State struggled offensively in the first half and then put up a billion points in the second half. Michigan State was able to basically every drive get in Iowa territory or score points. The problem for Michigan State is they had to settle for a ton of field goals. Michigan State kicked they kicked six field goals. 6 field goals in this game. You translate all those field goals to touchdowns, that's 24 additional points, and Michigan State wins 56-20. That's an insane offensive success rate against Iowa football, against a defense that's coordinated by Michigan State alumni Phil Parker, who has commanded elite defenses year over year over year at Iowa. And, I mean, Michigan State's offense just went off. The defense did a good job against Caleb Johnson and Iowa's rushing attack for much of the game, but Iowa did score. They scored 20 points in the second half, along with Michigan State, who also scored 20 points. Iowa's defense was just on the field for basically the entire first half, and Michigan State eventually broke them. They tired them out. Iowa's defense did, find some electricity, some juice. It's clearly a better offense than anything Iowa has had since maybe 2019, but the defense, with Sebastian Castro being out, especially in some of the weaknesses that they have had for much of the season, the defense is worse. And Michigan State, coming off of the bye, they did what elite coaching staffs will do. You get a week extra to prepare. I think that they sold out a little bit. They went all in. They put a lot of their chips in the middle of the table. That could be concerning for the upcoming game against Michigan, although I wouldn't think anything about it because I think this is one of the best coaching staffs in America. So I think they can come up with elite game plan after elite game plan after elite game plan. It's why they were actually competing with Ohio State for a half, despite all the turnovers that they gave up in Ohio State territory and some of the failures they suffered in that game and against the Oregon game. They just don't have the players yet to be a top 25 or top 20, top 15, top 10, perhaps even higher than that caliber of team. But they absolutely do have the staff. And you saw that in this game because they mauled and they murdered Iowa. Again, the score could have been 56-21. It could have. If Michigan State was just able to convert in the red zone for touchdowns instead of field goals. And Jonathan Kim did make some long field goals well outside of the red zone. I know that. But this is a game where you're seeing the offensive acumen and genius of Jonathan Smith, Brian Lindgren, his offensive staff, because every part of the offense played their role. And Michigan State's defense did a tremendous job in the first half of limiting Iowa on the ground. I mean, Caleb Johnson only had 98 rushing yards on 14 carries, and 75 of those yards came off of one carry. You take away 75 yards from Iowa, you just take away that one play. They only had 58 rushing yards on 22 attempts. They didn't even average 3 yards per carry if you take away that long touchdown run that Iowa had in the fourth quarter with 7 minutes and 22 seconds remaining. But anyway, enough of my rambling. I want to get into some takeaways that I have for this game. Also get into the just basic but very important statistics that we always talk about. But that was basically what happened in the game, what I told you. Michigan State just marched all the way up and down the field. They got into field goal range, or they scored touchdowns later on. No matter what, they kicked Iowa's defense off to the side of the road. They had 39 minutes and 44 seconds of possession and 468 total yards. They had a better game against Iowa offensively in terms of yards and in terms of game control than Ohio State did. And we know what Ohio State did to Iowa in the second half. Make sure, if you haven't already, to please subscribe, to like the video, to hit the notification bell. Please share the video around so we can get more college football fans to join the show. And comment your reaction to the scheme down below. And also, make sure to join our Discord server via the link in the description or down below in the pinned comment. If you want to support the channel monetarily, I welcome that. But doing the free things, subscribing, liking the video, hitting the bell, commenting, sharing the video around, joining the Discord server, and watching the video all the way through, well, those are very important things. Those are more important than supporting the channel monetarily, which, if you want to, you can do via joining the Patreon page or purchasing merchandise from my merchandise store, again, via the link in the description or down below in the pinned comment. But let's get to this matchup here. This was a huge, huge game for Michigan State. Huge win. And it's not like Iowa had this awful game and that's why Michigan State was able to murder them either. Iowa's defense did not play to their standard. I think Phil Parker and Kirk Ferentz would tell you that. But their offense did put up 20 points in the second half. And I would have thought that Iowa's defense would have been able to hold Michigan State to under 20 points entering this game. And I thought that Iowa would force more turnovers. I thought that they would perform at a higher level. And maybe they would have if they had Sebastian Castro, but I kind of doubt it. I was wrong. I picked Iowa to win 34-13. And while I was wrong in the sense that Michigan State would struggle to score touchdowns, at least in part early on in the game, and that Iowa's offense with its improvements would be able to hang some points on this defense, which they did, the scope of my understanding of how that would work out was nowhere close to the actual result. Like, Michigan State, yes, they struggled to score touchdowns, and they had to kick a lot of field goals or kick more field goals than you would want. But what I didn't understand is that they were able to get into field goal range on basically every drive. Even if Iowa scored the 34 points that I predicted them to, they would not have covered the spread, and it would have been a game for 60 minutes. So that was a clear miss by me. Iowa's offense, meanwhile, again, they just got up too late. It was 12-0 at the half. I felt like at halftime that Iowa was going to potentially come back, but I also know that even with Iowa's improvements on offense, a 12-point lead on Iowa 30 minutes into the game is probably the equivalent of a 3-score lead rather than a 2-score lead. And it would require Iowa to make amazing second half adjustments, force Michigan State to only kick field goals. Like, Iowa could come back, but the margin for error was tiny. And they did not operate within that margin of error because Michigan State scored more points in the second half than they did in the first half. They ended up winning by 12. The exact margin of victory they had after the first half. They put up 468 total yards to 238 for Iowa, 27 first downs to Iowa's 12. They had 39 minutes and 44 seconds of possession. When you have that type of yardage and TOP dominance, well, that's what Josh Pate would call a padlock stat. That right there is almost a guarantee of victory. Iowa averaged 6.2 yards per play, and they only had a negative 0.016 points per play margin. That, by the way, that points per play margin statistic in this instance is very deceiving, and we'll get to why that is. Michigan State averaged 6.6 yards per play and barely had a positive points per play margin. But again, we'll get into that more. I think you can probably already guess why the points per play margin is very close, despite the fact that Michigan State won by double digits and had those dominant statistics. Some more statistics to mention are these teams were equal in the turnover battle. A big premise for my prediction was that Iowa would force multiple turnovers from Michigan State and maybe cough up the ball once or not cough up the ball at all. And they didn't win the turnover battle. It was equal, yes, but with the game plan that Michigan State brought to the table, Iowa would have needed an additional turnover or two or a much greater level of offensive success to have a chance at winning this game. Iowa had 3 penalties for 30 yards. Michigan State had 7 for 75. This is still a young team. They're still undisciplined. Chemistry is not perfect. Again, Michigan State is not, I repeat, they are not a great team. They may not even be good. But that's just the whole broad picture. You zoom in on some of the pieces that Michigan State has, like their coaching staff. I've been saying for months now, elite coaching staff. I thought that Iowa was better than they were. Iowa is not the top 25, or I thought they were top 20, to be honest with you all. I thought they were a top 20 team. They are not even close to a top 20 team. They are not. As for Michigan State, I just thought that with what they really suffered for the first 6 games of the season was indicative of who they were going to be the rest of the year, and that you would just see major improvements, not in the second half of the season, but next season, after the 2025 preseason. Well, I guess these major improvements are coming earlier than I expected them to. So, as I've already said, I very much misread this game, but I have a lot of takeaways that I think are going to reign true in the future, that I think are, at least to me, pretty obvious. Number one, I was wrong about Iowa's defense. This is easily Phil Parker's worst defense since 2017, 2021. We talk about the losers first, and we save the best for last on this show. So, if you're a Michigan State fan, stick around until a few minutes from now. We're going to be talking about your team. If you're a Hawkeye fan, it's time to talk about your team. The college football playoff hopes are dead. This was a must-win if Iowa wanted to reach the playoff, if Iowa wanted to play to their ceiling. We're going to talk about this in a few minutes, but this was the team. This was supposed to be the team because Iowa brought back everyone and finally upgraded on the offensive staff. And this is not the team. They, by power ratings, are better than last year's team. They're better than the 2022 team in power ratings. They're better than probably every Iowa team since 2020 in power ratings. But they're not going to finish with the 2020 or 2021 or 2023 record. They're not going to. They're not going to Indy, and they have more than 2 regular season losses already. This is easily Phil Parker's worst defense since either 2017 or 2021. Let's check out this Iowa defense right now. Iowa football, they've improved on the offensive side of the ball. We know that. They're scoring right now 27.9 points per game. They have a top 75 scoring offense. Their scoring defense, though, is 31st nationally. They're allowing 19.7 points per game, which post-clock change, post-2023 clock change, is probably in the lower, maybe mid-20s in points per game allowed. 2023's defense scoring only allowed 14.8 points per game. In 2022, the defense only allowed 13.3 points per game. And the 2022 team had a gauntlet of a regular season. They faced Ohio State, they faced Michigan, who were 2 elite teams that year, and they did a pretty good job against those offenses. In 2021, Iowa allowed 19.2 points per game. In 2020, they allowed 16 points per game. In 2019, they allowed 14 points per game. In 2018, they allowed 17.8 points per game. In 2017, they allowed 19.9 points per game. 2016, 18.8. I think 2016 was Phil Parker's first year as defensive coordinator. He's been there for a while, so I don't know exactly when he joined the staff, but I can figure it out for you right now. He's been the DC since 2012. It's been a lot longer than that. 2015, defense allowed 20.4 points per game. This probably adjusting post-clock rules and the performances that I've seen this year, this may be Phil Parker's worst defense since about a decade ago, in 2014, a little over a decade ago, in fact. But we'll have to see for the rest of the year because, again, 7 games through, Iowa still has 5 games left, and Sebastian Castro, one of their best players, was out. But still, I was wrong about Iowa's defense. I thought it was going to be the best defense in the country this preseason. That's not the case right now. This is not the nation's best defense. Either that, or they are when healthy, and they weren't healthy against Michigan State, and Michigan State simply played to their offensive ceiling, and their offensive ceiling is, well, a near elite offense. But I don't think that's exactly the case. I think that Michigan State fans will tell you that this offense does have a lot of potential, but it also clearly has limitations and issues, some of which, well, surfaced against Iowa. But this team right now, they're allowing 19.7 points per game. They're allowing 0.349 opponent points per play. They're outside of the top 25 there. They're allowing 15.8 opponent yards per point. They're outside of the top 25 there. And they're allowing opponents to average 5.5 yards per play. The latter three statistics are not counting FCS games. I found them via teamrankings.com, which is what I use. They don't count games against FCS opponents for FBS teams, so that 40-0 victory over Illinois State is not factored in. But yeah, this is a defense that against the FBS has had struggles. The offense has improved, but it's a similar story to USC. USC's defense has dramatically improved. The offense has taken massive steps back. And you see that with Iowa a little bit here too. Although I think Iowa is a better team than USC. At least they're a better coached team than USC. USC probably has higher potential. In fact, a lot higher of potential than Iowa does. But you look at Iowa's offense. They've taken big strides forward. The defense, though, has taken sizable strides back. Hopefully Sebastian Castro can get healthy. We should all be praying for him. But you just look at the numbers. Even with him in games, the defense has clearly gotten worse. The best game of the season that they played was against Ohio State, where that looked like the 2022 defense, looked like the 2023 defense, looked like the 2019 defense, the defenses that were top 5 to finish the season. But outside of that game, they have not looked all that, well, to be frank, impressive for the Phil Parker standard. And I think that given Iowa's apparent weaknesses, they're 4-3, and Iowa is Ohio State's best win, power ratings and our own eyeballs may be overestimating Ohio State. Not just defensively, where we know they have issues, but even offensively on the offensive side of the ball. I don't know, though. I still think Ohio State's an elite team, at least near elite, and Iowa played a pretty good game defensively against them. But against Michigan State, you allowed over 30 points. You couldn't get off the field to save your life, even early in the game. Against Iowa State, the defense choked, allowing big passing plays late in the game, so that Iowa State could be undefeated instead of 6-1 right now. They're 7-0 currently. Favorite, I believe, to win the Big 12. At least they should be. And then the other games, like Minnesota. Minnesota had some success through the air on Iowa. So this defense has some issues, has some things they need to correct. They should get back to the drawing board. Another opinion of mine, this is supposed to be the team. This was supposed to be the year that Iowa was... I'm stumbling over my words here because it sounds so foreign to say that Iowa should be a Big Ten contender, but this was the year they should have been. They returned a ton of production, the majority of their starters. They brought back their entire offensive line, the majority of their defensive line, both of their starting linebackers who were All-American caliber players last year, the majority of their secondary outside of Cooper DeJean, their kicker. Their freshman punter right now is balling. He's incredible. And they brought in a new offensive coordinator. And, guys, the schedule's not tough. Oregon is absent. Penn State is absent. Ohio State was on the road, yes, but that's just one game against an elite opponent. Iowa State's, they're not elite, and Iowa game-controlled them for 3 quarters, 2.5 quarters. They should have beaten them. Michigan State is right now a less talented team than Iowa is, brought back fewer production, should have been a win, wasn't. I think that after this year, because Iowa's going to win more games, Iowa I think is likely going to finish 8-4, 9-3. Because at this point, Michigan State and Nebraska are probably similar caliber teams, if I'm being honest. And Nebraska is the toughest. Nebraska or Wisconsin, both of whom Iowa hosts, and we know that Iowa plays differently at home compared to on the road, are at this point the toughest teams that Iowa's going to be facing for the remainder of the season. So 8-4, 9-3, I think is pretty likely for Iowa at this point. I think that Kirk Ferentz should retire after this season. He has a 200 and 122 overall record, 124 and 87 in Big Ten Conference play. He's been at Iowa forever, since the late 1990s. This was the year. This was the year for Iowa. It was. And honestly, it's been a disappointment so far. Defense has taken steps back. The offense has improved, but it's still so damaged from all those years under Brycen Ferentz to where it's not good. And if you probably made the change to, let's say, Tim Lester last year, this offense might actually be good this year. But no, the stubbornness of Kirk Ferentz, well, continues to hold the offense back. Iowa's still suffering the consequences of that. And the defense, well, they have been near elite or elite probably every year since 2018 or 2019. And at some point, they can no longer carry the team. And I guess whether it's coincidence or whether it's injuries or Cooper DeJean being an awesome player last season and then leaving, or the Big Ten upgrading at quarterback. The Big Ten is much better at quarterback this year on an overall basis than they were last year. They just are. Whether it's any of those things, Iowa's defense has kind of caved in a little bit compared to previous defenses. And therefore, I think that Iowa has wasted an opportunity. They could have reached the playoff this year. If they had beaten Iowa State and Michigan State, and Iowa right now was standing at 6-1, we'd be talking about this team as a college football playoff contender, given the fact that Alabama has 2 losses. Tennessee lost to an Arkansas team who's standing at 3 losses right now, who got blown out by an LSU team who is great, but probably not national title contender good. Georgia looked like absolute, well, dog poop or wet dog, to tie the analogy to their mascot, against Kentucky, against Alabama, against Mississippi State, and their offense didn't play all that good of a game against Texas. This is a down year in football, and Iowa got gifted an easy schedule, and they returned a ton of starters and made staff upgrades, and they're not doing anything with it. So I think with all that being said, and the fact that whether it's under Hayden Fry, whether it's under Kirk Ferentz, Iowa's found ways to compete for the Big Ten before. They found ways to even win the Big Ten. I think they're a proud program. I think that, honestly, they can do better than this. And that's not to say I think Kirk Ferentz should be fired. The point I'm trying to make is he's past his peak because everything aligned to be the year this season. It all did. You want to look at the numbers? Iowa returned more than 80% of their production from 2023. The vast majority of their production in starters, and they already have 3 losses. They already have 1 additional loss compared to last year's regular season, where they played Penn State on the road, and Penn State of last year is a similar caliber of team to Ohio State this year. I'd say this year's Ohio State team may be slightly better, but we don't know yet. Let's just wait. That Penn State team was pretty awesome on the defensive side of the ball, right? I mean, 2023 Penn State had a better defense than any team this year has from what I am looking at right now in the 2024 season. I think that it's time. I think that you want to go out. Michigan State fans know this. You want to go out before you ruin the program, before things get ugly. Iowa still has talent on their team. They still have good coaching in parts. The program isn't ruined yet. Don't be Bobby Bowden. Don't be Mark D'Antonio. Be, not that Kirk Ferentz is Nick Saban, but Nick Saban retired before the program completely sunk, and it was on the way out. The Alabama dynasty was on the way out, even when Nick Saban was still there. He was not coaching like the best coach in college football at the end of the 2024 season. And that's why he retired. He knew. He knew that he couldn't keep producing at the level of perfection that he expected, so he retired. Kirk Ferentz should do the same thing. Go out with an 8-9 win season and have someone else take over a solid program. That's just what I think, though. Let me know what you think in the comment section below. Let's finally get to Michigan State here. This was a program-changing win for Michigan State. I did not think that the Spartans would earn this type of win this season, but they did. Alas, they did. And going bowling is a possibility. 7-5, dare I say 8-4 is a possibility. The chance for Michigan State to have a very successful season is back. It seemed like it was dead after 3 losses to Boston College, who we now know is not a good team, and to Ohio State and Oregon, who are some of the best teams in the country. What an amazing coaching job by Jonathan Smith and Brian Lindgren and Joe Rossi. And Michigan State, they played tough. They beat Iowa on the lines of scrimmage. Michigan State averaged 5.3 yards per carry on the ground with their long run of 26 by quarterback Aiden Giles. They were consistently getting 3, 4, 5 yards per carry against Iowa's D-line, which clearly, if there are any issues with Iowa and their defense this year, it may actually be more so on the defensive line than at defensive back, because we've seen 2 games now, Ohio State and Michigan State, where Iowa got bullied on the defensive line. And I think it's clear to everyone in the universe that, especially not Michigan State, but neither Ohio State have a Joe Moore Award caliber offensive line. Big issues for Iowa's defensive line. But also, you got to give credit where it's due. And in the same way where Ohio State ran for 5 yards per carry with basically no explosive runs and bullied Iowa's defense at the line of scrimmage, which is very impressive, Michigan State did that exact same thing. 40 carries, 212 rushing yards, 5.3 yards per carry, 1 rushing touchdown from Nate Carter. It was a masterclass in game control. What Michigan State did to Iowa is basically what Michigan did to Iowa in 2022, when Michigan went into Kinnick Stadium and just bullied Iowa for 60 minutes. That's what Michigan State did. And it didn't matter that Iowa scored 20 offensive points and at times seemed like they took the momentum back. It didn't matter because Michigan State's offense stuck to their game plan and, well, they won the game. They closed out, which is also what Michigan did to Iowa in 2022. Iowa scored a touchdown. They stole some of the momentum that Michigan had, but at the end of the day, Michigan stuck to their game plan and they won. It's what the elite coaching staffs do, and Iowa is always going to be a team that has good coaching. Offensively, maybe not, especially the previous few seasons under Kirk Ferentz, but Kirk Ferentz, I think, is a respected game manager, and Phil Parker and LeVar Woods are, I'd say, the best defensive coordinator and the best special teams coordinator nationally. So take from that what you will. Michigan State worked the best coached defensive staff in the country, putting up over 400 yards, 32 points, 27 first downs, and their defense was only on the field for 20 minutes and 16 seconds. You know how good that has to feel as a Michigan State fan? Scotty Hazelton defenses were always on the field. Not just because Jay Johnson's offenses sucked, but also because Scotty Hazelton's defenses couldn't stop a nosebleed on third down. They could never. The Michigan State game from last season basically was Michigan State had success on first down, some success on second down, and Michigan converted every third down known to man. That's why they scored the 49 points, is they converted an insane amount of third downs, especially through the air. Not tonight, or not Saturday night, rather. Not today. Michigan State held Iowa to, well, an okay 5 of 11 on third down, but many of those third down conversions came in the second half. The defense was clutch in the first half, where Iowa never got a scoring opportunity. They just simply punted every time. And I think that, there's hope. There's life for Michigan State here. You want to look at some padlock stats, as Josh Pate would say, or I would just say impressive statistics, Michigan State had a plus 185 yards differential, a plus 12 points differential, plus 0.4 yards per play differential, and they had 24 more plays than Iowa did. 24 more plays. Michigan State had 40 rushing attempts. Iowa had 46 total plays. That's mind-boggling. Michigan State, 70 plays. Iowa, 46. When you have 24 more plays than your opponent, you're guaranteed to win unless you are super ineffective, unless you are like Marshall against Ohio State a few weeks ago, where you go for it on fourth down and have some success, and you really only average 3 or 4 yards per play and don't have a lot of negatives. Having that much dominance is impressive. That's how you win in the Big Ten. That's how you beat teams who are better than you, who have more talent, or who have more athleticism than you do. Michigan State has more athleticism than Iowa does, but Iowa's more fundamentally sound. Iowa is the more experienced team, and Iowa entering this game looked to be the far better team. Power ratings will still tell you that Iowa's better than Michigan State, and a part of me believes that, but Michigan State put on a clinic, and they bullied Iowa, and they kept their defense on the field for 40 minutes. They ran 24 more plays. They had over 200 yards of both passing and rushing, a balanced attack, 1 rushing touchdown, 1 passing touchdown. Jonathan Kim was 6 of 7 on field goal attempts with a long of 55, made both of his extra points. He's made over 90% of his field goals this year and over 90% of his extra points. Michigan State, they haven't scored a ton of touchdowns this season. He's only made 14 extra points. He has had more field goals made, 15, compared to extra points made, 13. He's Michigan State's Jake Moody. That's who Jonathan Kim is. He's absolute money, and he will win Michigan State more games this season. And it's a shame that he won't be at Michigan State next season. I don't think he has. He doesn't have any additional eligibility, I don't believe. This is his final year, and I think that he will make a good kicker in the NFL. Just a program-changing win, a win that recruits will look to, that future Michigan State players and Michigan State staff will look back on and say, this is when we really got the ball rolling. This is really when people started to pay attention to Michigan State. Last but not least, this is a point I've already made, so we'll just quickly get through it. Michigan State has an elite coaching staff. The team is fight, and the game plan versus Iowa was well crafted. It was beautifully executed. Michigan State did a good job of blocking. They only allowed 3 tackles for loss and 2 sacks from Iowa. Those are pretty good numbers. And again, Michigan State, they were pushing Iowa off their blocks. They were pushing Iowa back. They were getting to the second level and doing really impressive stuff on the ground. And through the air, Aiden Giles was 22 of 30 for 256 yards. They were picking on John Nestor, Iowa's youngest corner in that game, least experienced corner, consequentially worst corner in the game. And they were having success. That's where Michigan State's only passing touchdown, to Monterey Foster Jr. was on John Nestor. There was another play where it was John Nestor's job to tackle Aiden Giles, I believe, and he just couldn't do it. So they knew Iowa's weaknesses on defense. They knew Iowa's weaknesses on offense. They dared Cade to beat them through the air. There were several times where Iowa had drops, or they had open players, or there were contested catches that would have went in their favor that they couldn't make because Cade McNamara is just a below-average quarterback. He's not good. Iowa's rushing offense, though, is very good, and that's why Michigan State was constantly stacking the box. They were making sure Iowa couldn't beat them to the outside, and they made a very balanced and aggressive game plan on defense. It was a wonderful coaching job. So congratulations to Jonathan Smith, Joe Rossi, and Brian Lindgren. The offensive line played well, and Childs had the best game of his career, easily. 30 pass attempts, 11 carries on the ground. He had over 40 total plays, and he had an 81.3 quarterback efficiency rating. He had over 300 total yards in the game. My faith in Aiden Childs has been restored. I think that the staff, whatever they did over the bye week, worked. Because Iowa's defense this year has been better at forcing turnovers than last year. That's one area where they've improved. And they did pick off Aiden Childs once. It was in the first half. But they couldn't do anything with it. Michigan State literally, a few plays later, forced an Iowa punt. Because that's how well the defense played in the first half. And in the second half, I can't exactly blame them because this Michigan State defense is limited, and Iowa's offense has moments where they do look good. I think Tim Lester calls a good game for Iowa offensively. Again, he just doesn't have the players in whole to operate a balanced, good offensive attack. My MVP of the game is quarterback Aiden Childs. I think this is pretty obvious. 307 total yards, a touchdown, an 81.3 QBR, and he completed over 70% of his passes. Aiden Childs next season is going to be one of the best quarterbacks in the Big Ten if he can keep up this type of play. If he can replicate the success he had against Iowa, against the majority of Michigan State's opponents that remain in the 2024 season, and if he can build off of that success in the 2025 preseason to execute at a high level in 2025, which is going to be a big year for Michigan State football, given the staff they have, the resources they have, the recruiting class they're going to bring in. And I think also, importantly, they're going to heavily use the portal again. I fully believe that. Thank you all so much for watching this video. Remember to like, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and comment your thoughts down below. Thanks to Crash2488 and Braska Rascal and Kind of OH for being Heisman members and sponsoring this video and channel. Thanks to Chris Lane, Ismar, Taylor 9, Chilton Kush for being All-American members. And thanks to John Lynn, Roaming Gnome, Matthew Seal, Austin Christmas, Joshua Jorgensen, and Will Loftus for being All-Conference members. Have a great day, everyone. Make sure to check out my merchandise store, Patreon page, and Discord server via the link in the description or down below in the pinned comment. Go green and go Hawkeyes. Have a great day.